Hi there, my name is Iain Brennan and I'm a Professor of Criminology in the Department of Criminology and Sociology here at the University of Hull. I was going to give you a quick overview of my Level 5 module, Offending and Victimisation. So this module looks at the idea of crime in the individual. It asks who commits crime, what are the thought processes they go through in doing so, and who is a victim. What are the issues in relation to victim identity? Who thinks that they will be a victim? How do victims respond when they are victims, both in terms of behavior and psychology? So we're very much focused on the person within this module. So we begin with an idea, with looking at some epistemological ideas around positivism and rational choice. And those are the sort of core ideas at the heart of this module. But as we'll see as we go through it, ideas around positivist ideas and rational ideas around who offenders are and who victims are often fall apart. And we need something slightly more sophisticated to understand these behaviors and these identities. So we focus on, in the early stages, how do people think when they're committing crime? How are they weighing up the pros and cons? Are they weighing up the pros and cons of doing a behavior, that sort of quintessential deterrence and rational choice model? But can we come up with a more sophisticated way of understanding how the advantages and disadvantages, the rewards and the costs of criminal behavior are calculated? We then focus on different time points in relation to offending. So we look at what are the acute risk factors for committing crime. So you may be familiar with the term hangry, somebody who's both hungry or angry because they are hungry. And we look at things like diet in the short term, alcohol, temperature, and tiredness as acute risk factors that influence irritability and aggression and may in some ways be responsible for offending behavior in the short term. But we also look at long-term factors as well. So what are the long-term risk factors for committing crime? So we hint at the idea of adverse childhood experience and the cycle of violence, something we will return to at the end. And we also look at things like the interaction of adverse childhood experience with genetics and brain disorders and a variety of other factors. We're also interested in what leads to the stopping or cessation or desistance from crime. So we focus on how can we introduce stabilizing factors or turning points into an individual's life that will actually prevent them from committing further crime. Then we look at what influences the decisions that offenders make and ask, are they rational, and apply this to a specific case, that is burglary. So we will go through the act of committing a burglary from leaving one's home to leaving a burgled premises and look at the decisions that are made by burglars across these different stages, from choosing where to target, and then within a street or an area choosing which house to target, choosing which rooms to target in order, and then how to get away. So we will go through the process of the decisions made by burglars. Then we'll move into the second part of the module, which focuses on victimization. We ask about fear. We look at fear of crime and that concept. How do we conceptualize it? How do we measure it? Is fear of crime rational, which is age-old criminological questions, and we'll see how complicated that question truly is. Moving further into victimization, we will look at what are the consequences of victimization. So who reports crime to the police? Why do they do it? But more at a more conceptual level, what is victim identity, and what is the impact of victim identity on future behavior and ways of thinking about oneself and the world? We will also look at psychological responses. So how do clinical symptoms like post-traumatic stress response emerge? What are the factors that increase the likelihood that someone will have a long-term emotional consequence as a result of being a victim? Finally, coming full circle, we question how different are victims and offenders. We look at the victim offender overlap in the short term, but also the experience of victimization on the part of repeated offenders. So we will look at the life course risk factors for offending, and we'll see that within the idea of a cycle of violence or adverse childhood experience, many people who are involved in violence and other forms of crime have extensive histories of victimization. And we will finish by asking some questions about the separation between victimization and offending. Along the way, we will focus on research methods. So in each of these questions that I've asked about offending behavior and decisions, there's always some source of knowledge. So we will look at longitudinal surveys, we will look at experimental tasks that maybe induce violence or aggression through different manipulations. We will look at qualitative methods in terms of understanding how burglars make decisions about offending and which houses to target. And we will look at clinical measurements of traumatic response, but also survey measurements of things like fear of crime. So it blends research methods with an understanding of the individual within crimes. So I hope that sounds interesting. I love this subject. I get to talk about some of the things that really interest me, in particular, how does violence emerge in people and what are the long-term consequences of childhood trauma. So I hope that you find it interesting too, and I look forward to seeing you on that module in the future.